You could get every tactic, you could get every trick, you could get everything that you need to quote unquote succeed. But the thing that we're going to talk about today, if you don't overcome that, you're probably not going to get any level of results. Podcast Growth Nation. Today, for episode number 190, nothing is going to help you until you fix this. We were in the Next Level Podcast Accelerator last night as of recording this, and there's kind of been a little bit of a theme in the group, and somebody mentioned it on one of our previous calls. They mentioned how they were afraid to put their face out there because they didn't know what was going to happen with AI, and they didn't know what was going to happen in the future with AI. And that is completely understandable. I have some clients that they're really, really nervous about the same thing. And they also understand that that's kind of beyond their control to a degree. If you put content out consistently, it's going to live forever. And that is a piece of what we're talking about here today. Alan always had this really good example. If you post different stuff on Instagram than you do on Facebook because your family is on Facebook, you most likely are terrified of judgment, especially by the people closest to you. And unfortunately, that is one of the things that has to go. We have to overcome, we have to evolve through if we really want to win as podcasters, as content creators, because you are going to get judged. Maybe most harshly by the people closest to you, especially in the beginning. But that is the internal stuff that we have to work through if we really want to be successful. That is one of the hardest things. I remember early on for me, I was in a field called weatherization. So we would go into usually schools, and it was our job to make the building more energy efficient. So we would work above the ceilings and focus on sealing gaps and cracks and holes, and we worked on windows and we worked on doors and all that stuff. And I remember I was so afraid to even mention podcasting to my coworkers because a lot of them were very closed-minded and had very fixed mindsets and were just miserable. And I was always afraid to share that because I was afraid that they would judge me. And luckily, there was a few guys that I worked with that were really cool, that were all about it. And I got to have those conversations with them, which was awesome. But I was terrified of judgment. But I think as I did this more and more, I started to understand that, number one, most people just don't care. That's a piece of it. And I think that's like a really humbling way to start the process of unraveling the fear of judgment. Most people have better shit to do than worry about your podcast. And I mean that in a good way, not a bad way. Most people just, their lives are busy and your podcast isn't for them and they're not going to listen. That's part one. Part two, most of the people that reach out are not most of the people that listen. So if you get a negative comment from somebody, they most likely listened once, had a bad day, and wanted to give you shit for it. If you get somebody that reaches out and has really nice things to say, that's a very, 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 very small percentage of people that actually listen. If you really want to think about it, you most likely will never hear from 99.9% of your audience. Just kind of the way it works. 99% for sure, right? One person might reach out or 5 people might reach out. But if you have 1,000 listens, you can see how the numbers start to kind of add up, right? Over time. So I think the important understanding that we must have when it comes to working through the fear of judgment and when it comes to working through the fear of feedback is, 1, it is a suggestion that somebody is actually listening, potentially. That's one. And then this is probably the biggest thing. If you avoid feedback and you avoid judgment, you will never actually be able to succeed long term because the more quote unquote successful you get, the more judgment you get. And it'll end up breaking you. Imagine if, I think a really good example is somebody who says, well, I want to run a marathon, but I don't want to run. Well, so I'm not going to work on a mile. I'm not going to work on 2 miles. I'm not going to work on 3. There's no way when you start the race, you're going to finish 26. There's no way because you haven't conditioned yourself. There's something called exposure therapy, right? If you're afraid of heights, exposure therapy is working your way up a ladder, hypothetically. You expose yourself to your fear in very small doses. I think this is the same thing. But we don't want to face it. And what happens is we get backed into a corner where we only allow ourselves to grow so big because if we grow any bigger, we're going to get feedback. and that feedback might not be great. So that's one piece of this. And I think the other piece of this is, what does it actually mean to be fully authentic? That was a conversation that we had last night as well, where somebody asked, how do you be more authentic as you go? How do you lean more into your authenticity? And here's the truth. You have to do the next thing that scares you. So for me, sharing certain things it doesn't scare me. I don't, for whatever reason, just like you are not scared of something that maybe I am scared of. So for me, that's probably not the edge that I have to lean into. Maybe I have to lean into more of giving more hardcore feedback to you, whether you're watching or listening or clients or whatever it is. Maybe that's the edge that I need. But my edge is different than your edge. So whatever the thing that scares you is, that's probably the thing that you need to lean into. And here's the hardest thing about all this. I think one of the reasons it's so hard to be ourselves, fully authentic ourselves, is because when you are yourself and somebody doesn't like you, you can't write it off as, well, that's not who I am anyway, or I was just playing a character, whatever. That is as close to your heart as it gets. But I think the only way to do this is little by little by little by little by little. Little by little by little. If you don't listen to your episodes, you listening is the first step in getting feedback. It's not feedback from other people, it's feedback of your own perspective of yourself. If you don't look at your comments, that's feedback. That's something that you're missing out on. But the fear of judgment is massive. And I'm telling you, it's holding so many people back. It's holding so many people back. How many people started a podcast to help other people because they felt like they needed to get help and they want to be the person that they needed? It's going to require you to go through a lot of internal changes that you don't know most likely when you start podcasting. And this is why I say this all the time. Having a podcast is way more than just talking to an audience. It's way more than being influential or having influence or being an influencer, whatever. The thing that's going to grow most from your podcast is going to be you, because you're going to have to grow in order to get the level of impact that you want. And there's something to that. And that might be the most challenging part of this that nobody really talks about. Well, yeah, we're going to talk about guests and we're going to talk about hook, story, lesson, and all that. We're going to talk about being a better speaker and how to monetize and all that. None of that matters until you figure out you. And until you work on the confidence, until you work on the self-worth, until you work on understanding where your fear of judgment comes from. Now, here's what I'm not saying. I am not telling you to say, I don't care at all what people think. I think that's dumb. I don't think it's realistic. I think it's a cop-out. I think that's a cop-out. Because you want to take the feedback that is going to help you get better, and you want to take the feedback that you believe is rooted in some level of truth. Now, is everybody's? No. Is everybody's going to help you get better? No. But you might be able to put a positive spin and create an opportunity to get better from that. But if you don't do that, and you don't get to the place where you're capable of doing that, it's only going to hurt you. We all know somebody who, they say, I'm just going to be me. This is just the way I am. If you don't like it, too bad. Okay, and you can be contextual for a room. Right? You can be contextual. Gary Vee is a really good example. I don't think you have to swear at the middle school kids, but I also respect the fact that you're being authentic. But I think you could contextually read the room a little bit better. That's what I'm talking about here. I'm not saying that you want to get to the point where you don't care what anybody thinks. There's a difference between caring and allowing it to affect what you do. There's a difference between caring and allowing it to take you off track. To not put out the episode, to not do the social media post, to not have the guest, whatever it is, not release the content. There's a difference. I always want to care. Always, 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 always. And I want to make sure that that does not stop me from doing the thing. 190 episodes of this. Of course I care. Of course. But if I allowed the fear of judgment to stop me, there's no way I would have got to 190. There's no way I would have got to 2,300 on the other show. But in the beginning is the time to work on this, because when nobody's listening, that's the time to work on this. That's the time to iron out the kinks. If you just start a restaurant, now is the time to work out the kinks, not when the doors And not when there's a line out the door and all the seats are filled and you got the phones ringing off the hook. That is not the time to practice. That is not the time to create the systems. That's not the time to iron out the problems. So if you're early on, and right now maybe you're frustrated with the lack of visibility you're getting, now is the time to do some of the internal work. Because I'm telling you, it's harder to do it later. It's harder to do it later when you have a bunch of people messaging you, and every time you look, the numbers are going up. It's a great problem to have, for sure, externally. But internally, if you're not ready for that yet, it can do a lot of damage, for lack of better phrasing. It can do a lot of damage. Who would you bet on? Would you bet on somebody who is really good with money who wins the lottery to keep it? Or would you bet on somebody who is terrible with money that wins the lottery? I would bet on the first person. Same with this. I would bet on the person who has been getting, taking, and owning feedback along the way, rather than the person who just makes it, and then we expect them to be able to handle the feedback with grace. I don't think that's the way it really works. And I think we can look at it. There's a lot of examples. Child actors and people that go viral overnight, they usually can't handle what comes with it because they didn't work their way up. They didn't get exposed to it for long enough. So that's my challenge for you. Remove the safety net. You've heard me say that before. Maybe it's just jumping on social media and doing an Instagram story. Maybe that's what it is. Or maybe it's sharing an episode or something you learned from an episode in a place where you haven't shared it before. Maybe you avoid Facebook because your family's there. Maybe that's the edge to lean into. That is the key that we're talking about in this episode. It's not a tactic. It's not an industry insight. It's none of that, because that stuff doesn't matter if this doesn't get fixed. And I want this journey to be fulfilling for you. Now, am I saying when you release stuff, you shouldn't be nervous or you'll ever get to the place where you're not? No, not necessarily. No. You might still be nervous to do a lot of the things you do. It doesn't mean they're not good. It doesn't mean they're not serving you. It doesn't mean you haven't grown in that department. That's what we're talking about. I'm not saying you're never going to get to the place where you say, oh my goodness, I hope people take that the right way. I'm not saying you'll ever get to the place where you relinquish that completely. I still have episodes. I said something yesterday on an episode where I was like, I hope that doesn't get taken out of context. And if it does, I will handle that, right? That'll be my goal. Last thing before I let you go. I'll never forget this. This was probably 2019 maybe. I had started the podcast in 2017. I left my full-time job in 2018. 2019, I think I had just started coaching maybe. And somebody DM'd me on Instagram and they said, hey, I don't mean this with any disrespect, but what gives you the right and what gives you essentially the credibility to be coaching people? And that was like my deepest fear. My deepest fear was somebody to call me out and say, look, you didn't go to college. You don't have any certifications, blah, 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 blah. Why do you get to do this? Luckily, they did it with respect and they said, hey, respectfully, I don't mean this. Don't take this the wrong way. And this is what I had to do. I had to think to myself, is this person right? I had to think to myself and say, well, if I was going to write a message, what would I say? And then I sat down and wrote the message. And essentially it was, well, at this point, I think at that point I had done, I don't know how many episodes, 100 episodes maybe, 200 episodes, I don't know. Probably like 100. At this point, I had done 100 podcast episodes with some of the most successful people in the world, in our niche. That was one. At that point, I had learned every single day for the last 2 years. I had gone from suicidal to chasing my dreams and working through imposter syndrome and working through anxiety and working through depression and working through being not enough and feeling not enough and not smart enough and all that stuff. I had learned so much from this journey of self-awareness, and I was helping people that were 2 to 3 steps behind where I was. I wasn't coaching anybody ahead of me. I was coaching people that were struggling with the things I was struggling with a year or so ago, a couple of years ago. The mindset piece, the peak performance, the consistency, the relationship stuff. Like, I wasn't coaching people on law. I was coaching people on mindset for the most part. And I sent that message over. And what it did was it proved to me that there is a lot more real and reality in this than you're giving yourself credit for. And I wonder if the same thing wouldn't happen to you. If somebody reached out to you and said, hey, what gives you the right to boom? What would your answer be? Maybe your answer is, I feel everybody has the right to have deep conversations and find what lands. Awesome. I love that. I love that. That's a great answer. You'll have your own unique version. I'm not claiming, and this is kind of what I said in the message, I'm not claiming to have all the answers. I'm just trying to help these people in places where I've been able to help myself, and I think I can help them too. That. But I first justified it to myself before I justified it to somebody else. Now, I'm not saying you have to justify it, but you know what I mean. First, you have to write out the note, look at it and say, wow, this is a really good note. Okay. But unless I got challenged on that, I don't know if I ever would have written that out and then actually seen that and then able to digest that for myself. And that was a really important thing for me. That really, really, really helped me. So hopefully there's a lesson in that for you. Maybe that will never happen. I don't know. But if it does happen, sit with it and see what you come up with. And maybe I can help spark that in you. What gives you the right, quote unquote, to do what you're doing? Whether it's a podcast, whether it's coaching, whether it's courses, whatever, merchandise, whatever it is. What gives you the right to do that? Answer that question. And I mean that in a positive way. I'm not saying you don't have the right to do it. Look, I wanted to start a podcast and have deep conversations and try to change the world in my own unique way. Nothing you're going to say is going to surprise me. So I support it for sure. And if we were going to do like an action item for this episode, I would say do one thing, intentionally seek judgment. There was this TED Talk. I don't remember the name of it. I think it was like the 100 Judgments or something. I think it was a TED Talk. And it was this guy, it was rejection proof. I think if you search rejection proof, you'll find it. But it was this guy who every day went out and tried to get rejected and would go to a restaurant, ask if they could make like a very unrealistic meal with the hopes of getting rejected. And it got easier and easier and easier and easier. This is the same thing. It's weird. It's like the thing that we're afraid of so much is the thing that we need to seek in very small doses in order to be afraid of it less. It's just the way it's wonky, the way it is. But if you get negative feedback now, I'm telling you, you'll be way better at receiving negative feedback eventually. If you get judged harshly now, it'll be easier as you go. Right now might be the hardest time, but it's also the most important time forever. So that's my thesis. A little bit of a different episode today, but a lot of the episodes I've done on mindset and the internal stuff, confidence and self-worth, those episodes have done better than a lot of the other ones that are about tactics and industry stuff. And I just think, I don't know. At the end of the day, you're a human doing this. And you got to work on the human stuff too, because that is oftentimes the bottleneck. You can Google most of what I talk about on this podcast, and you can Google what we talk about today, but it's very hard to Google something if you don't know it's the bottleneck, right? Or ChatGPT or Claude or whatever. There's too many of them now. I can't keep up. All right, cool. If you feel like this is the struggle and you want to have a conversation with somebody who has struggled with this as well and just practiced over thousands and thousands of episodes, I'll have my link below for a free 30-minute podcast breakthrough session. As always, my DMs are open, my emails, whatever works for you, works for me. Shoot me a message. I'm happy to respond. Podcast Growth Nation, our private Facebook group. We'll have the link below for that as well. And I hope for you, you're getting outside of your comfort zone. That's the personal development, self-improvement side of Kev talking. But I'm telling you, when we start a new round of the Next Level Podcast Accelerator, the first 2 sessions and the first 2 connection sessions are all about internal stuff. And there's a reason we start there. And we have a lot of people that have a lot of breakthroughs in those first 4 sessions. There's a reason we start there. Because without that foundation, no tactic really matters. It just doesn't matter. So I hope for you, you're getting out of your comfort zone. I hope for you that you're working on yourself as much as you're working on your podcast. Because that's the only way to do it. You level up, your podcast levels up, your podcast levels up. You have to level up, bada bing, bada boom, rinse and repeat. All right, as always, keep on podcasting, keep on crushing it, and I will talk to you all next week.